Welcome to today's webinar, Transforming Baltimore's Opportunity Zones. I am CEO of the Center for Accelerating Innovation. It's a portal to information and links to resources related to opportunity zones. My co-host for this event and problem solver is Jimmy Atkinson, a real leader in advancing our understanding of this program. So Jimmy, why don't you say hello?
Hello, everybody. I'm Jimmy Atkinson, founder of Opportunity DB, the Opportunity Zones database, host of the Opportunity Zones podcast, and also co-founder at OZ Pros. Very pleased to be here with the host of today's program, Egils Milbergs. Thank you again, Egils, for inviting me to moderate. I believe I'm moderating the second panel today on project initiatives in the Opportunity Zone neighborhoods of Baltimore. Is that correct? And I'll let you take it.
So we've assembled a great panel with knowledge, experience, expertise, with all aspects of this innovative incentive for revitalizing low-income communities. Our focus today is on Baltimore, and this is the first episode of a series of geographically focused webinars. We want to highlight what is happening across the country. There are over 8,700 OZs in urban and rural areas. We obviously can't cover them all, but we will try to do our best to showcase some of the most innovative strategies and projects and investment approaches we can find. So for this program, the Opportunity Zone incentive to succeed, we need to keep educating policymakers, civic leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, small and big business, educators, others, in terms of what's working, not working, best practices, success stories, lessons learned, policy recommendations. And so we want to strengthen the ecosystem of stakeholders who want this incentive to be a catalyst for creating jobs and incomes. And we are going to start with our first panel that will be speaking. And let's get underway with Ben Seigel, Baltimore Development Corporation. And Ben has been very helpful in helping us put this program together. And he's a real leader in understanding the Opportunity Zone incentive, and he's certainly had a powerful impact in Baltimore. And Ben, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks so much, Egils, and good afternoon, everyone. Jimmy, thank you for hosting us as well. I believe I have some slides. Are we able to share them on the screen? I was doing that just by way of introduction. So I'm Ben Seigel, and I am with the Baltimore Development Corporation, where I serve as the City of Baltimore's Opportunity Zones Coordinator. Just kind of in terms of background for folks who are on the line who aren't from Baltimore or aren't aware with kind of our local organizations. BDC is our local economic development agency for the City of Baltimore. And so as an economic development agency, focus on a range of economic development policy and partnership areas around providing assistance to small businesses, around overseeing major real estate investment and developments. We oversee our tax increment financing programs within the City of Baltimore, and do a lot around business attraction, business expansion, and really with a focus on job creation. And so as we approach our work around opportunity zones, this is the agency where I sit, and you'll hear from a number of colleagues and partners throughout the call today, all of whom we're working closely together. My colleague at the state level, Frank Dickson, who's with our State Department of Housing and Community Development, serves in the coordination and liaison role at the state level around opportunity zones, and Frank and I work very closely together within the City of Baltimore. And I also just note that as I get into kind of my role and how we've been approaching opportunity zones in Baltimore, we were really the first city to kind of identify a full-time coordinator around opportunity zones. So I began my work back in October 2018. So I just kind of hit 2 years in this role. And in kind of having this point person or coordinator specifically around opportunity zones, we've been able to kind of establish a national model for how larger cities, mid-size and larger cities can have this function. And, we've really been able to do it through a public-private partnership, as is kind of, a lot of the work around opportunity zones being implemented across the country, where the public sector, private sector have been able to partner. And so for us in Baltimore, my role and kind of a lot of what we're doing around the operational sides and coordination sides of opportunity zones has been supported by the Able Foundation, which is one of our key local foundations in Baltimore City. And we've also had a couple of other foundations who have since followed suit and supported some of the broader efforts around our operations for opportunity zones in Baltimore, including the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the PNC Foundation. So I just wanted to point out kind of the importance of having those philanthropies and the private sector as key partners of ours, as we've been able to kind of build out our strategy for opportunity zones in Baltimore City. So just here's my email. Happy to kind of connect with anyone offline, follow up with any questions that you might have about the presentation today. Seigel@baltimoredevelopment.com. So why don't we jump to the next slide? So I just have a couple of slides. I know we have a number of speakers today, and I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, especially around some of the very cool and transformative opportunity zones projects we have in Baltimore. But I did want to kind of share a couple of slides and just kind of speak to our overall strategy in terms of how we've been approaching opportunity zones in Baltimore, and some of the outcomes we've been looking to achieve and partnerships we've been seeking to put into place through this work. So for those of you who know Baltimore City, this first slide just gives you a pretty kind of crude map, I guess, if you will, of the city of Baltimore. The blue shaded areas on the map are the 42 opportunity zones. We have 42 census tracts that have been designated as opportunity zones in Baltimore City. And you can see that they're kind of somewhat spread out across the city. We have kind of most of the clusters in East and West Baltimore, and in some of some of the more historically lower income neighborhoods, obviously kind of speaking to the eligibility criteria around opportunity zones. But also you'll notice kind of around our industrial port, kind of in South Baltimore, we have a number of census tract opportunity zones too there. And kind of the key thing that I wanted to express with this slide and with the map is that we were pretty intentional in the designation of our opportunity zones, in that they're kind of centered around three key economic drivers, if you will, within the city, and we wanted to be able to take advantage and leverage those economic drivers to drive investment in these neighborhoods, in these opportunity zones, to the benefit of local residents and businesses. And so kind of what you'll see on some of the points there on the map, one of our focus areas was to try to cluster opportunity zones around some of our key anchors. So our universities, our hospitals, and so we've got in Baltimore City 7 universities and colleges, all of which are within opportunity zones, kind of key hospitals, some of which are affiliated with our universities, like some of the Hopkins hospitals, Johns Hopkins, some of the University of Maryland hospitals. And so those areas that are key economic drivers in our neighborhoods, either are within or kind of connected to opportunity zones. We also wanted to focus on kind of our key business districts across the city. So, some of the industrial waterfront areas where we have key manufacturing and industrial and port-related businesses, some of our parts of kind of our downtown business district area, and some of the other kind of business districts across the city have been included. And kind of related to that, in Baltimore, we have nearly 20 accelerators and incubators, startup accelerator, incubator programs. Most of those accelerators and incubators also are located within our opportunity zones. And then finally, we've got these areas on the map where you can see kind of these diagonal lines. In Baltimore, we've designated and identified 4 impact investment areas. So these are neighborhoods that over the next decade will be undergoing significant community neighborhood development. These areas have been designated through the lead of our local housing and community development department within the city of Baltimore. They put out a framework document last year that really provides a blueprint for kind of how investment will be driven in kind of across the city of Baltimore, but especially starting with these 4 impact investment areas. And we've identified those obviously as key opportunity zone priority areas for us. They include kind of in the top left of the map, the Park Heights area, where our Pimlico racetrack is. I'll give a shout out to that as the Preakness just happened last Saturday in October, which was an interesting occurrence. So there's a lot of development that is underway and that will be going on in the Park Heights area over the next 10 years. That's a key opportunity zone area for us. The kind of Penn North area of West Baltimore, it's kind of the Pennsylvania Avenue, North Avenue corridor. Kind of Southwest Baltimore is another key area. Kind of the Hollands Market, Pigtown areas, and then in East Baltimore, kind of our Broadway East, Johnston Square area. So those neighborhoods are key impact investment areas for the city. And for us, within the Opportunity Zones framework, these are really key neighborhoods where we're looking to drive investment through our partnership with Opportunity Zone investors. So I can jump to the next slide. This is a pretty basic slide, but what I wanted to kind of cover here is that in our approach to Opportunity Zones, once we kind of get beyond kind of our strategic approach in terms of geography and linking our Opportunity Zones with economic drivers within our neighborhoods around the anchors, the business districts, and kind of the areas slated for significant neighborhood and community economic development, we really tried to be intentional in our approach to Opportunity Zones to kind of build what we call an Opportunity Zones ecosystem. Ecosystem is kind of a very fuzzy term, but really what we've been looking to do is kind of, as it relates to our Opportunity Zones, bringing together kind of a coalition of partners, who can work side by side to identify projects, to bring in investors, to bring in other needed public or private resources and subsidies, and to really engage the community in a way where we can drive investment into Opportunity Zone neighborhoods that's going to have impact for our local residents and businesses. And just to kind of walk through this a little bit, and it also speaks to kind of my role within Baltimore City, serving as Opportunity Zones coordinator, in terms of trying to, assemble this ecosystem, if you will, and connect all the various partners together, who can make these transformational investments happen. And so, in terms of starting at the top 2 boxes, the investors and the project sponsors, this is obviously kind of the 2 key components of an Opportunity Zones ecosystem. On the investor side, we've been spending a lot of time within Baltimore around doing outreach both locally and within our region, but also nationally to connect with, the Opportunity Zone funds, other investors who might be looking to create Opportunity Zone funds, and kind of invite them to Baltimore to, reach out to them, to get them to, learn about Baltimore, learn about the market opportunities, learn about the community impact opportunities, and where their investments, can really meet the strategies that these funds have. And what I'll say is I use the term impact investors. We've also been pretty intentional in our outreach that, we want to work with investors, who have an interest in the double bottom line, who are interested in investing in projects that will, get the financial returns for their investors, but also investors who understand and who have a commitment to and who care about supporting communities, investing in projects that can have impact, again, for our local residents and businesses. And so we've really been focused on engaging with those types of investors, some of whom are on the phone today, or on the line today, and you'll hear from later. And then second, obviously, is our project sponsors. So, we've been very committed to working across our 42 opportunity zones to, develop pipelines of projects, both on the operating business side as well as real estate projects. And, kind of from our perspective within the city and, in partnership with our colleagues at the state, working to put together a pipeline of projects that we can then connect with investors. And so we really, again, tried to be strategic about understanding the investment priorities and strategies of the Opportunity Zone funds we've been able to connect with, and then matching that up with projects that meet those criteria, whether it's an asset class type of project, whether it's a specific size of project, a specific neighborhood, specific partners that they might be looking to work with. And really on both ends, for the investor and for the project sponsor, try to limit some of the opportunity costs in identifying investments, investors if you're the project, and then in identifying investments if you're the investor. And what kind of some of the results we've seen to date, we've probably connected with well over 50 established Opportunity Zone funds nationally, who we've been able to work with in Baltimore City, connect with projects, help them understand, some of the opportunities in Baltimore. And then we have an active pipeline of over 70 projects across our Opportunity Zones that we're working with very actively. In terms of kind of the bottom two boxes here, those really are building this part of the ecosystem that can support kind of the facilitation of the connection between investors and project sponsors, and then making those projects move forward. So, one of the things that I'm sure most folks are aware of as it relates to Opportunity Zones, in many cases to make projects work, so to make a capital stack come together, and something that's going to work from a financial perspective for an equity investor, of which an Opportunity Zone fund is, oftentimes, we need to be strategic in figuring out how we can bring to the table some of the public resources and subsidies we have at our disposal. So, whether that's tax credit programs, whether that's grant or loan programs that are available, at the city or state level, really working to kind of connect those types of investments into the larger projects where an Opportunity Zone fund is coming in. And that also includes, other kind of non-public partners. So we've got several of our key Opportunity Zone projects where foundations have come in and have been critical investors, either through, some type of forgivable loan or debt instrument, or in some case grants. But these types of resources, without getting too into the nitty gritty on kind of the financing side, are really key inputs to making kind of a broader capital stack come together for a transformational project in what are oftentimes kind of below market or lower income neighborhoods. And then finally, kind of the key component here is making sure that kind of with all of these projects, we're engaged with community partners, with our local community organizations, neighborhood associations, and that we're very intentional on working with our investors and with the project sponsors to ensure that these projects are going to have benefit for local communities. And in some cases, there will be formalized community benefits agreements that the projects are implementing. In other cases, it's just being really intentional about what the project is, how it's structured, and again making sure that there's buy-in, and that there's in many cases kind of a stake in the game for the kind of community partner or community organizations within those neighborhoods. In addition to that, we really rely on our community partners to in part help identify our pipeline. So as I mentioned, kind of a pipeline of over 70 projects. Part of that is coming from directly the community, and one of the things that we're still learning about as it relates to Opportunity Zones and in working with investors is that we really want to implement projects that are going to drive development in our neighborhoods, especially in our underinvested neighborhoods, and that are going to help create opportunities and and wealth and jobs and home ownership in some cases, affordable rental opportunities for our local residents in these neighborhoods. So, we've been at it for a couple years now and trying to build this ecosystem. One of the really cool kind of outcomes that we've seen to date is just a really kind of great working partnership, especially among our city and state agencies, as we look to be strategic with the limited resources we have to kind of coordinate around the various projects that all the different agencies at the state and city level are working on, and to really all be rowing in one direction. So that's been kind of a key side effect, if you will, of having an intentional focus on opportunity zones. So we can jump to my last slide here. This is just kind of some of the kind of lessons learned / results to date. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm referencing a lot of the projects that you're going to hear about a little bit later on the webinar today. But one of the kind of most important outcomes that we've seen to date is just the ability of opportunity zones to bring a whole kind of cadre, if you will, of new investors into Baltimore City. So I mentioned being engaged with over 50 opportunity zone funds and investors. And while all of these investors might not in the short term, close on or invest in projects in Baltimore, what it has done is that it's increased interest in projects in neighborhoods in Baltimore, and it's gotten a whole new group of investors to take a look at Baltimore, take a look at projects, build relationships with some of our local developers, our local operating businesses, and even if they're not going to do an opportunity zone investment in the short term, maybe, down the road, there might be other types of investments that they would look to do. And through some of these new partnerships, there's certainly kind of new doors that are opening for our local businesses, for some of our developers as well. And so, we don't want to kind of minimize the importance of having these new partnerships. And obviously, the ultimate goal is for these investors to make equity opportunity zone investments, and that's obviously happening, but there's broader outcomes and successes to that as well. Second kind of early result to date is that Baltimore's been one of the few places in the country where we have had some early successes and investments into operating businesses. A lot of that's been driven by one of our presenters on the second panel, Len Mills with Verte Opportunity Fund, and I'm not going to steal Len's thunder, but that's something that we've been really excited about. Baltimore has a very active startup community, especially in kind of tech-oriented areas, life sciences, medical technology, and so that's kind of a key strategy of ours for opportunity zones, and so we've been excited by some of the early activity there. Kind of thirdly is that what we've seen to date, where we've had kind of the kind of greatest investments and kind of the most interest from investors, have been in kind of some of the larger neighborhood transformation mixed-use real estate projects, again, some of which you're going to hear about later today, and some of the neighborhoods that have kind of achieved the most interest from investors include kind of three that I mentioned here: our Station North area, which is anchored by our Amtrak station, Penn Station. You'll hear about later from Bill Struever the redevelopment of Penn Station and an opportunity fund investor who's come in there. In East Baltimore, our Bayview Greektown area, which is anchored by Hopkins Bayview Hospital project there called Yard 56. You'll hear from Dave Bramble a little bit later about some of the investment that's come into that project. And then finally, on kind of our western fringe of downtown, the Bromo Arts District, also where kind of the first public market in Baltimore, Lexington Market's located. University of Maryland, Baltimore has some of their facilities there. We've seen some key investment and a lot of interest in those areas. And so those projects kind of in those neighborhoods have all been on the larger side. So where we've seen a lot of the real estate investment to date have been in projects kind of north of 30 million, 50 million. Some of these projects are even larger than that in some of these neighborhoods. And that's where a lot of the opportunity funds to date in the first year and a half, 2 years have been gravitating. Kind of the fourth and final area is around workforce housing and kind of community level projects, if you will. You're going to hear from Brendan Schreiber about a little later today about a project in West Baltimore along North Avenue. these are projects that for me are kind of like our next frontier, our next level. Now that we've got a couple years under our belt, we've seen opportunity funds, make investments into larger projects. We're now really interested in engaging investors who want to continue on those larger projects because those are key drivers within Baltimore City, but also projects that are on the smaller side, kind of under 10 million, under $5 million, smaller residential or even kind of some mixed use real estate projects where an equity investor can kind of come in as a key part of the capital stack. And so, I'm optimistic that as we move into 2021, we're seeing more investors interested in these types of smaller workforce housing projects where maybe it's 12, 15, 20 units of affordable workforce housing with some ground floor retail or office, because it's those types of community level projects that over the next decade are really going to help us drive transformational change in our neighborhoods in Baltimore, leveraging kind of some of the key anchor developments. And kind of another key part of that is the role in Baltimore of small local developers, oftentimes developers who are from the communities where they're doing their development projects, and to be able to connect these developers with equity investments to help them grow their businesses, but then also to help them grow inclusive development within our neighborhoods are going to be key. And we are looking for impact investors and opportunity zone funds to be critical partners there. So I'll pause. We're going to hear later about all of these projects in more depth, but I'll just close by saying, we've been in Baltimore, very bullish about opportunity zones. We've been trying to be very deliberate and strategic, because the one thing we know is that if we don't do anything, then nothing's going to happen, right? So we've really tried to be proactive, strategic, work across the board with public and private partners to, take the best advantage we can of opportunity zones and of new investors coming into our city, to drive investment in our neighborhoods, finally in a way that's benefiting and impacting our local residents and businesses. So Egils, I'll turn it over back to you for there.
Ben, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. We got a couple of questions while you were talking.
Okay.
And I wanted to see if I could at least address it at this point. It was about the nature of the ecosystem, meaning the demographics and the community involvement in the Opportunity Zone program. 2 or 3 people commented that they were wondering whether there was enough engagement of people of color, people from the community organizations, etc. What's your take on where this is heading regarding participant involvement?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously kind of a key priority of ours. Most of the neighborhoods that are Opportunity Zone neighborhoods are predominantly Black and brown communities. And so, we have taken the approach that we want to make sure as we're bringing, new investors into Baltimore, as we're looking at projects in these neighborhoods. On the one hand, we're working closely with the local community. So when we started our work in 2018, 2019, we did a number of community workshops. I was spending a lot of time, across the 42 opportunity zones, meeting with our community organizations, our neighborhood associations, kind of identifying the key projects in those neighborhoods. And then secondly, we're looking to be very intentional with the investors who we work with, for them to, recognize that, we care about supporting our local neighborhoods. We care about investments in Black-owned businesses. One of the operating businesses that's been invested in East Baltimore is a Black-owned business. That's kind of a key outcome for us. And really wanting to work with, kind of people of color who kind of across the board are, kind of doing the real estate development, and who are kind of involved in the projects. And so part of that on kind of working with local project sponsors is that we are committed to seeing, projects develop community benefits agreements, develop targets for hiring locally from the community, both on the temporary construction jobs, as well as for permanent jobs. And I think you'll hear a little bit later from Dave Bramble and some of the work that he's been able to do at the Yard 56 project in terms of working with local organizations around local jobs, local business opportunities. So all of those areas are really critical to us. again, I'm not saying we've got it all figured out either. I mean, it's a challenge. And you know, the key for opportunity zones is that these are private sector investors. We don't control their purse strings, but what we can do is guide them to key projects and then bring behind them, you know, other subsidies and resources that the city can bring to the table, and just being clear on what our principles are for development.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks, Ben. Appreciate the presentation. So next up, Frank Dickson. He's the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. He's quite involved in coordinating Oz initiatives across the state. And Frank, why don't you take it away? I think you need to be unmuted.
Apologize for that. Hero, if you could load my presentation, that'd be great. Thanks everybody for having me. I am the Ben Seigel of the state, if you will. So I started a few months before Ben as the point person for opportunity zones for the state, specifically led by the Department of Housing, which the Department of Housing, I think they followed sort of the federal model where the Housing Urban Development is the lead agency for the federal government. And so accordingly, the state of Maryland decided to have it housed within the Department of Housing and Community Development. And the emphasis is on community development, and that's dealing with all of the neighborhoods throughout Maryland and trying to make their communities a more prosperous and thriving area. And so that's really what the state's focus is. That's what the Department of Housing's focus is. And so all of our efforts are probably on the precursor of trying to help the businesses and projects get going and be successful. And so therefore we're pre-funding projects even before some of the investors are showing up to actually take them to the next level. So next slide, please. I wanted to just show a little recap of kind of where we are today. Unfortunately, there's not a mandate for reporting of investment. And so investors do have to execute their deferrals with the IRS, and that will be reported upon at some point. I connected with a colleague of mine at the IRS, and it's not likely we're going to get any detailed reporting until next year. But as it relates to Maryland, what's been reported to publicly or that we know of through the transactions and parties that we're working with. Currently, the Maryland's received very conservatively $150 million worth of opportunity zone equity. That's equity that's gone into a business or a project. And that represents approximately about $820 million worth of investment into an opportunity zone projects or businesses. Most of the dollars are going into projects because the way the incentive is laid out, it's a little more easier and achievable and meets the guidelines of investors investing in real estate versus businesses, predominantly because of that 10-year holding period. The map is a depiction of our information exchange, and you can see the opportunity zones are in green. And there are some colorful icons there representing projects, businesses, and nonprofits that are helping support opportunity zones throughout Maryland. The information exchange is an open platform that enables pretty much any business and or project that wants to promote either for investment, for tenants, or for hiring to list on the exchange. And on the left, you can see some of the data as it relates to what those projects, 117 projects or businesses, 35 businesses indicate as far as magnitude. And that's just we're still early into this. We're probably in the third inning of the opportunity zone incentive if you look at it from a 10-year time frame perspective. And so still early, and there's still lots of folks that are looking at raising funds and looking to make investments. Next slide. This is a shot of the information exchange itself that we are going to be launching next week. And it's a refresh of what we have today. It's going to be a little more user-friendly, and the back-end admin will be a little more user-friendly as well. And there's some neat community data aspects to this that is for free for the user, whoever wants to use it and see some of the information that's behind the attributed to the community specifically. Next slide. I'm not going to go into this deeply, but again, another snapshot which Ben showed, where the opportunity zones are specifically for Baltimore City. And this shows the businesses and projects that are scattered around the opportunity zones within Baltimore City. I did want to make a note that sort of in the designation process, when the opportunity zones were designated, one of the general themes was to pick anchor institutions, whether that be academic institutions like the historically Black colleges, specifically from Maryland. That would be Morgan State. That's up. You can see that they have a project up there on the right, where Morgan State is, directly above Bel Air if you're looking at the map. And then Coppin State University, a portion of the medical campus for Johns Hopkins University, being in East Baltimore there. And then outside the region, certainly other universities, College Park, UMBC, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, Frostburg, as examples. And so that's just one line of selection of designation of why some of the opportunity zones were designated. There are some other lines, such as the being in a transit-oriented development was another consideration for locating or selecting an opportunity zone. Certainly here, the Amtrak location being a transit-oriented area, that was one of the reasons why it was designated for an opportunity zone. Next slide. I wanted to just highlight some of the examples that have been funded. So this is Lexington Market, and the top picture on the left, if you squint, you can see a whole bunch of people on the actual next to Lexington Market parking area, and that was the ground opening for the South Market. As you can see in the bottom right, where the people were standing is now a hole, and that is the current site, or a picture of the site of what's being developed. Coincidentally, to the left, as you can see in the top left, there was some construction going on, a hotel and a garage and a student housing apartment complex. And then as you look in the bottom picture, you can see where it is today from a construction perspective. I highlight this because this is a project, Lexington Market, that the state has provided grant dollars, loans, bridge loans to help support this project in getting off the ground. I actually did the underwriting for a $3 million bridge loan so that the project could close on their New Markets tax credits last year, so that they could get their tax credits so that the project would move forward. And so this is an example where the state's coming in with funds, not only grant funds, but bridge funding to move projects to the next stage. And so this is a real live example of where the project is. The next stage, literally, we're talking 9 months later after ground opening. So next slide. As it relates to businesses, we don't hear a whole lot about investing in businesses. The Department of Housing provided a loan to Clean Nanomedicine, which is in a opportunity zone up in Cecil County. They're in Northeast. They're in the Principio Business Park. And what's exciting about this company is that they've hit their stride, and they're looking to potentially go public via a SPAC transaction, which they expect will close in November of this year. What that's going to do is it's going to enable them to fund the expansion of their clinical labs up there. They look to take on an additional 50 to 100,000 square feet. Probably will initially invest somewhere in the neighborhood of $20, $30 million, of which will successfully probably go up towards to $100 million. And so this is an example of helping businesses in a small way to move them and help them to become prosperous. And fortunately, this company in its current time frame is doing really well. And so that's an example of a company in an opportunity zone. They did not receive opportunity zone equity because they had already been started, and so they wouldn't have fit the parameters to be able to receive opportunity zone equity. May or may not receive equity as it relates to their facilities if they decide to go down that route or not. So that's an example of a business. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight some of the programs that are being utilized. And I didn't put a summary slide in here, but as it relates to just the Department of Housing's dollars, in fiscal 2020, $200 million worth of funds went to support housing projects, businesses, community development in opportunity zones in fiscal year 2020. That's about, I think it's about 26% of the dollars spent by Department of Housing were in opportunity zones. The Neighborhood Business Works is a lending program for businesses. The Rental Housing Works program is a loan program for affordable housing. Strategic demolition is used and has been used by many of the participants on the panels that'll come later, that'll talk about their projects. And that's where I talk about where states using existing monies to help clear projects or provide funds for tenant improvements as those projects are getting started. And those are non-dilutive funds that help some of the projects move forward, or helps people potentially buy land that needed to have things done to it. And so some important funding mechanisms for folks that are looking to utilize state funds. And then on the business side specifically, Department of Commerce handles a variety of tax credits, and there are specific opportunity zone enhancement tax credits for businesses that are going into opportunity zones. Next slide. These are for just locations for the specific funds and learn more about opportunity zones for the attendees. That's really all I had in closing. I thankful for the opportunity. Happy to answer any questions. I'll look at the chat specifically. I saw a question on North Avenue, and I'll connect with that person with a specific map of some of the things that we are doing. I have been doing, working directly with the community, and that is in conjunction with our colleagues in the city, specifically the City Housing Department, as well as Baltimore Development Corporation. So thank you very much.
Frank Dickson. Yes, we're going to really work on the technical part of this, aren't we? Michele, I'd like to introduce you, the President and CEO, Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore. I want to thank you for your help and help put this together. And you're on.
Thanks, Egils, and I will be very brief. My internet's been cutting on and off, so I want to zoom through this before. The Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore is a regional economic development and marketing organization. We are a group of government, private sector, academic and nonprofit leaders in 7 jurisdictions: Seigel, Carroll, Hartford, Baltimore counties, Baltimore City, Howard County, and Anne Arundel County. We're not a membership organization. Our board members, of which there are over 50, support us with yearly contributions every year. And unique to nonprofit organizations like ours, the county executives of the counties I mentioned, as well as the mayor of Baltimore, are voting members of the Economic Alliance. Should I try to share my screen?
Your slides are there?
Yeah, I've got it. Okay. Apologies for this as well. I want to get the slideshow up. Okay. So can you advance it?
You would have to advance it as you go.
I think you're just running it now
Yeah,
on your
I'm
end
sorry.
there, Michele.
I'm in control. I am in control. That's terrific.
It looks great though. Keep it up.
Okay, so that's about the Economic Alliance, and I know, Egils, you're going to be sending these out.
Yes.
So our goal is to market the economic development assets and opportunities in the entire region. As I mentioned already, the 7 jurisdictions that are part of the Economic Alliance, and this is mandated in our corporate charter. We also, as a basis, frankly, for almost all the marketing that we do, is the amazing location of the greater Baltimore area along the mid-Atlantic coast. We are so well positioned because we're near other major metropolitan areas like DC, Philadelphia, Boston. Transportation network is excellent up and down the East Coast. We have great proximity for moving goods because of the Port of Baltimore, as well as freight rail and highway. And we offer a lower cost of living than many of the cities that we compete with. Our marketing platform is focused on marketing the primary economic drivers for the region: cybersecurity, IT, manufacturing, logistics, healthcare and life sciences, and agriculture and energy. We're also very focused on other industries such as the defense industries, digital health, higher education. And when you get this slide, you'll be able to access the industry profiles for all of these industry sectors. Again, our role is to push out marketing materials and information to regions that we compete with, so that there is interest in Boston, for example, in our life science, digital health, biomanufacturing industries in greater Baltimore, to attract talent and capital. And because attracting talent and capital is our primary focus, having the opportunity zones as a tool in the toolbox is very, very important. We track the investments in emerging and growth companies in the region, issue a quarterly investment report, which you can also find on our website. And we push out a monthly newsletter, always focused on a particular industry sector and, again, the assets in this region. Our marketing platform through social media, as well as digital ads in targeted competitive markets, is meant to drive people to our website. Once people get to our website, they will find a lot of information about all of our jurisdictions and, again, the assets in those jurisdictions. Of course, opportunity zones is one of those primary assets, and you've heard Ben Seigel talk about the city and Frank talk about the state. So I'm not going to get into why opportunity zones are so important for economic growth in this region. However, I do want to say that I personally think, and the EAGB is trying to push out information about the opportunity zones as an asset for investment and innovation. I know that many investors, venture capitalists, et cetera, look for early exit strategies when they're investing in companies. But we feel that if they're aware of the opportunity zone benefits for operating businesses and can look at the bigger picture as well as some of the other benefits that come with opportunity zones, that early exit strategy may not be so important. And I'm not going to go into this as well because, again, both Frank and Ben have gone into this information. This is a map of our 7 jurisdictions that shows all of the opportunity zones in orange. And you can see the number of opportunity zones in each of the counties and the fact that Baltimore City has 42. The area is very rich in terms of the opportunities in the opportunity zones, but also the ability to not only attract investment, to get real estate-based projects moving forward, but also to get, again, a real emphasis, a real focus on the ability to attract investors and talent to support our innovation economy. The marketing that I mentioned earlier, we've spent a great deal of time over the past year and a half. I started at the Economic Alliance in January 2019, of making sure that we had a very, very solid basis for our marketing program. We wanted to make sure that all the data that we were pushing out was current and sourced and relevant to the story we were telling. We wanted to make sure that all of our marketing and communication platforms were interrelated and connected, and that tell the story of the region and the health of the region, and obviously the health of the region based on the health of each individual jurisdiction. Again, the goal is to attract talent, investment, and business activity based on our industry-specific assets. This is just a slide that shows some of the digital ads that we had been placing. Earlier in the year, we put a hold on this when the pandemic pretty much shut the world down, but we're looking at starting to place these ads again on a very targeted basis. They're digital ads, very targeted basis, placing them in regions where we feel we can be very strong competitors with. I mentioned Boston with life sciences, the Research Triangle Park with life sciences as well as cyber, Chicago with life sciences, Atlanta and New York for logistics, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an example of the type of ads that we're looking to place, that we have placed and looking to place again on digital platforms, whether it's a digital platform for a trade magazine, a business journal, or just a Google platform, to encourage people through these ads that click on the link, be directed to our website, and get more information about this amazing region. Whew, so that's it. This is where you can reach me. My email address is here as well as my phone numbers. I encourage you to go to our website to get more information. And within that website, you will see individual pages for each of those 7 jurisdictions, celebrating the assets in those jurisdictions for all of those industry sectors that I mentioned.
Thank you, Michele. Really appreciate that presentation, a great overview. All right, for panel 1, the wrap up is Brian Darmody. So there you are. Okay, take it away.
Yes, if you could advance my slide. So I'm Brian Darmody. I'm CEO of the Association of University Research Parks. I think I may have some formatting. I'm going to talk a little bit about opportunity zones and anchor institutions. Next slide. So we're an international nonprofit based in the U.S. with offices in Washington, D.C. area, in College Park, Maryland, and Arizona. I live in the Baltimore region. We represent 40 states in the U.S. and 13 other countries. And we really represent research parks and innovation districts sponsored by universities, federal labs, corporations, and localities. Next slide. Quickly, the first research park in the world was started in Stanford University. Stanford doesn't need our help. So Silicon Valley grew up as a result of the research park in Stanford. Next slide. But these are the members in the Baltimore, Washington region. And it's important to know that we have more, we're a national, international organization. We have more members in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area than any other part in the country. UMB Biopark specifically was mentioned. That's in a opportunity zone, College Park, BW Tech in Baltimore County, and then we have some others in the Washington region and other parts of Maryland. Next slide. But also it's important to understand that Maryland uniquely has a lot of the organizations that are helping build and plan and manage innovation districts and other kinds of facilities, some of which are in opportunity zones across the area. So whether it's Whiting-Turner in Baltimore, Wexford Science and Tech, JLL, Air St. Gross, and others. Next slide. So thanks to Egils, and by the way, Egils, thank you for hosting this, and Jimmy, forgot to mention thanking you. So we collectively applied to the SBA for a discussion on accelerators for opportunity zones, and we received $50,000. We had a discussion in College Park. Some folks from Baltimore came down to really talk about how can we bring to the attention of opportunity zone investors across the country opportunities to invest in Maryland. And that's kind of what my association is trying to do. We have anchor institutions, places where a company that might start can grow, whether it's the UMB Biopark, you know, BW Tech in Baltimore County, or I know Morgan State is doing some activity out there, and as Ben and Frank mentioned, you know, Morgan State is an opportunity zone. And a couple of years ago, my association, we hosted a webinar, or actually an in-person meeting for HBCUs across the country and presidents who wanted to build innovation districts and accelerators around their campuses, focused on HBCUs. Next slide. So we've created what we call the National Opportunity Zone Accelerator. It's all of our members across the country that are in opportunity zones. Some of them are in rural areas. As you probably know, opportunity zones, some distress areas are in rural areas. Oftentimes there is a university that may be in that opportunity zone. Next slide. So you'll see in the next slide, these are our members that are in opportunity zones. You'll see a cluster in the Mid-Atlantic, but you can see in Louisiana, New Mexico, and very rural New Mexico, there are members that are in opportunity zones, but that also have anchor institutions. And we're trying to bring this to the attention of family offices and other folks around the country who are looking for places to invest these discretionary opportunity zone funds. Next slide. So we've been working with LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and Maurice Jones, who's the head of that. That's the largest nonprofit focused on affordable housing and community engagement. And we had a webinar with him, and basically he talked about the importance to engage leadership and the impact of opportunity zones in your community. I think Baltimore is a leading city in that regard. It's gotten a lot of national attention with the hiring of Ben Seigel and others. Next slide. So the one asset that Baltimore has a lot is, as Michele mentioned, is a lot of assets in the bio area. You have great medical schools, you have other institutions, and so how do you take advantage of that through an opportunity zone kind of focus? Next slide. So a growing part of our membership are university biohealth research parks, university health science systems, places like Children's National in Washington, D.C. It has J-Labs. That's in an opportunity zone, by the way. So that's an accelerator, an incubator. So imagine getting opportunity zone investment for a company that's going to help address pediatric cancer. That's the kind of opportunity we think is allowed through opportunity zone investing in our research parks and accelerators. Next slide. And why biohealth facilities make a great match. As you know, there is a 10-year investment window that you have to continue that investment. And biotech investing in companies tends to be long because the maturation for those technologies is very long. And so there is an alliance of opportunities and incentives for investing in biotech companies. Next slide. And these are just some examples. I mentioned Children's National, Nebraska Innovation Campus at the University of Nebraska. That's in a very rural part of the country, but that's an opportunity zone. Harlem Biospace, it's an incubator in Harlem, New York. They're focused on biotech companies in an opportunity zone as well. So we need to take some of the learnings from Harlem Biospace, Nebraska Innovation Campus, and Children's National and make sure Baltimore is thinking through some of those opportunities. Next slide. I think you're going to be hearing from Len Mills about Verte Oz and Galen Robotics at 1100 Wacomico. I mean, this is a perfect example of an investment in a company rather than real estate, which is really what our association's focus is on. Next slide. As you can see, this is just shows you where the investment is in different categories in opportunity zones. And as you can see, operating businesses on the right-hand side, they have not attracted a lot of investment opportunities yet. But as Frank Dickson said, we're in the third inning of a 9-inning game. Maybe there will be further innings after because Congress can always extend and can always change the rules of opportunity zones. Next slide. The one thing I did want to mention, so last year there was a bill put in that would have disallowed the state treatment of opportunity zone investing that the federal government has. So it essentially would have taxed in capital gains on this through your state taxes. Luckily that legislation was defeated, but I think it's important for the state and Baltimore City to make sure that we don't put together policies that would create disincentives for opportunity zone investing in Baltimore City. And I think that's something collectively we need to keep our eye on. Next slide. So I mentioned my association. So in November, we have the head of bio, Dr. Michele McMurray-Heath, new head of bio, speaking. Next slide. And Steve Case, Rise of the Rest. So as I mentioned, Silicon Valley doesn't need our help, but a lot of our members in rural areas, urban areas, and getting more investment in places other than Boston and Silicon Valley is one of the things I'm working on. And on the same conference, as I mentioned, we'll have Maurice Jones, head of LISC, talking about the role and responsibility of anchor institutions to do community investing. Next slide. So that's just the date. It's November 2nd to the 6th. Next slide. And with that, I thank you and look forward to hearing the rest of the other panels. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Brian. All right, we're going to go into the second panel here, but before we get Jimmy started on that, I just wanted to make sure that I took the opportunity to thank our sponsors and partners. You've heard from some of them. This is the group here that was involved in putting this event together and recruiting some folks to be on the program, and I want to thank them very much. We're going to be going into doing more of these webinars, hopefully more smoother than the start of this one, but we're in conversation with folks in South Carolina, and also Austin, Texas, and Miami, Reno, Tahoe area, Seattle, as to highlight opportunity zone activity that's happening in those cities. Nothing is confirmed at this point, but our intention is to do about 7 of these things before the end of the year, and highlight what's going on in these communities when it comes to opportunity zones. Well, I want to turn it over to Jimmy Atkinson, my co-host, my technical problem solver, Zoom problem solver. I really thank him very much. We had a very good event a couple of months ago on how COVID was impacting opportunity zones. So let's move forward to the second panel, and Jimmy, take it away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Egils. And thanks again for allowing me to co-host. Egils, did we want to save some time toward the end here for some Q&A? Are we going to be taking Q&A from the audience today?
Well, we can take a look at the chat. I haven't been following it all that closely, but maybe you see some things.
Sure.
I think,
well, go ahead.
yeah. I think that one kind of general issue that comes up is that some of the problems of these opportunity zones are like problems in schooling and the ability of kids to go to school, and childcare is kind of an issue, and recreation and parks are kind of an issue. I'm wondering if any of the panelists that have spoken would address these kinds of non-real estate kinds of issues, and maybe infrastructure issues like water and food, energy, broadband access. It seems to me that this Oz incentive could potentially be applied and be a catalyst for making some changes with regard to those areas. Open it up to anybody.
Very, very well, maybe correct there. Do you want to have them just address those concerns during their presentations?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to have our panelists address those issues during their presentations? Or
Yeah, well, that would be great. I just want to point out that that seems to be some of the questions, and I'm picking up in terms of the chat and some email I'm getting.
Sounds good. And if you do have a question, please do feel free to use the chat. We also have a Q&A tool in your Zoom toolbar. You can use that as well. And Egils will be responsible for kind of moderating those and addressing them to the group, or Egils, you can have me address them to the group panelists as well. So let's move on to the second half. The second half of the event today, the second panel is going to highlight a lot of the different project initiatives that are currently underway in Baltimore's opportunity zones. Before we do move on to that second panel, I did want to bring in Will Walker. He's kind of the halftime show here. So Will, you're standing by here. I'm gonna get you on in just a minute. Just wanted to let you know I hadn't forgotten about you. Just to tease the second panel, we're going to have some really excellent speakers on coming up here in just a minute. We're going to have David Bramble, managing partner at MCB Real Estate. Bill Struever is principal and managing partner at Cross Street Partners. Leonard Mills is CEO of the Verte Opportunity Fund. And Brendan Schreiber is president of Schreiber Brothers. They're all working on project initiatives in opportunity zones in the Baltimore area. But first, I wanted to bring in our halftime entertainment here today. Will Walker is Director of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at CrowdCreate. And for those who are unfamiliar with CrowdCreate, they are an innovative service provider that connects investors with private equity funds primarily. Will, can you tell us a little bit about CrowdCreate and what you do there, just in a couple of minutes, if you don't mind?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Egils, for having me on and letting CrowdCreate sponsor this first event. It's going really well, I think, and very exciting. I took a bunch of notes myself. But my name's Will Walker. I'm head of business development at CrowdCreate, and we're a very innovative 7-year-old, different type of digital marketing agency. And I was very interested in a lot of your panelists so far, because they are reaching out to not only investors and influencers and strategic partners inside of Maryland and Baltimore, but also outside, because we work with tons of accelerators, funds, VCs, hedge funds, accredited investors, family offices. I could go on and on. Personally, I've had a 24-year private equity career, so I'm well educated on how to approach and strategically target certain investors, OZ investors of all classes and profiles. And here at CrowdCreate, we have over a database of over 45,000 accredited investors, many of them active in the OZ zone or certainly want to get involved. We have over 15,000 family offices also, many of which have their own OZ zones and are supporting ones. One that I'm proud of that also works is shown many times by EIG and certain prominent think tanks from Washington, like the city of Baltimore, is the Hall Fund or Hall Family Office in Provo, Utah. And they also have a lot of ties in with the city of Salt Lake, as well as the state of Utah, many social and civic tie-ins. And we work very closely to bring in additional strategic capital, partners, other accelerators, that type of thing. And Egils, one of the points you just made, we have one that we're just starting to work with in Pittsburgh, a big fund. They have a lot of capital to put to work in OZ zones, and they're in the ag tech. They're specifically in ag tech. And actually, the Heinz Family Foundation is behind them, and won't get into that. But it's very exciting to work with so many different quality projects that need certain growth strategies and want to target a specific profile with specific content to investors, that the investor classes that they're actually working with already or looking for. We make those introductions. We customize that story, your story, if you have a project, and certainly make sure it gets to the right qualified eyeballs, and then manage the relationship to bring it in to speed up that process so that there is a lot of trust, a lot of knowledge. We get a lot of the preliminaries out of the way. So when you do talk to these investors or institutional retail, they're really ready to talk turkey, so to speak. And I don't know if I can use that phrase anymore, but they're ready to really get to the meat of the project and work. And so it was really music to my ears to see all the accelerators and connection. And like I say, we're working in projects right now, and one I'm proud of too is a solo project, Martin Miota. Jimmy and I just did a social impact webinar with him, and he has the Beehive campus in South Los Angeles and the Solo Impact Fund. We're able to work with some of his projects and guide investors, not only from inside California, but also outside, that want the theme of do well by doing good. Yes, they're looking for returns. They're looking for the, good operators, a lot of different things, but we know how to tailor that. We know how to work with different assets to differentiate your project, your needs, your city, your region, your management team. So I guess I think that's about it. The one thing I'd like to say too is we work with over 100,000 influencers. Yes, we can either find or we already know lots of OZ investors of all class sizes, but don't give up on or forget influencers either. I work with people like Josh Childress in a South Los Angeles. He's a Hall of Fame basketball player. Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks. We're doing several projects where Russell is really lending his name, support, and sometimes capital sources to work with different projects. So we line up all of this. We have the relationships, and we're very strategic in working with all types of projects and regions, like I say. And Steve Case, Revolution Capital, somebody we are certainly harnessing. I know that we worked with some of his funds and some of his head of funds here recently. Jimmy and I did as well. So anyway, I want to thank Egils again for having me on. Jimmy, for you co-hosting with Egils. And I'm Will Walker. You can see me up there, but I'm Will, 2 L's, at crowdcreate.us. So if you can see that in the fine print underneath, I applaud you. My eyes aren't that good anymore. But Will at crowdcreate.us would welcome a discovery call or any additional information. Certainly want to follow up with a lot of the speakers and here today in projects. So thanks for having me on again. Back to you, Jimmy.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Will. Thank you to CrowdCreate for helping to sponsor today's event. Let's move on now to panel 2. David Bramble, you're going to be up first. If you wouldn't mind turning on your video and let us know if you're going to be sharing your slides, David, or if you'd like Hio to take control of that. And David, there you go. You're unmuted now. But just by way of introduction, David Bramble is managing partner at MCB Real Estate, and his specialty is in sourcing transactions, financial structuring, and project underwriting and execution. Very pleased to have him with us today. David, how are you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Fantastic. So do you have a slide deck you're going to be sharing, or would you like Hio to run it?
We sent the slide deck. Hopefully he's got
Okay, so Hio, if you wouldn't mind pulling up David's slide deck and getting that going, that'd be great.
All right,
Okay,
so
I think you're in business there, David. Take it away. Thank you.
we will. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having us. We're always excited to talk about Opportunity Zone stuff, particularly in our great home state of Maryland and city of Baltimore. I'm going to be brief. I won't take up my whole 5 minutes, I hope, but I'm just going to quickly sort of give you a little bit of background on MCB. So we're based here in Baltimore, although we invest, as you can see, up and down the East Coast. We are a traditional investor and developer. We invest across retail, office, industrial, and mixed-use assets. We have about 2 million square feet of construction development going on in various markets throughout the country. So you may ask why a traditional developer like us would get involved in something like opportunity zones. And really, we're really only doing it close to home, where it has more meaning than just getting another deal done. My partner Peter and I founded this company back in 2007. Any opportunity we have to do a deal that's close to home that we think will be impactful for the city or the state is something that we want to work on. You can go to the next slide. The first project I want to talk about is our Yard 56 project. I think this is a really interesting example of what can happen with an opportunity zone and how it can be impactful for communities. This was a dilapidated factory that at one point was a huge provider of jobs for this part of East Baltimore. This is located directly across the street from Johns Hopkins Bayview Hospital. As you all are familiar, or hopefully familiar, Johns Hopkins is one of the most important institutions in the country, and of course, very important to the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore. And sitting across from one of their major campuses was an old factory that had been shuttered for almost a decade, that was catching fire. We used to joke quite often that this was the only property we've ever owned that looked the same before and after every fire. It was in pretty bad condition when we acquired it. So it was environmentally contaminated, sitting in the middle of a neighborhood that was looking to continue its forward progress, but it had a lot of great attributes, which is connectivity to 95. You can see that in the background there. That's I-95. Its proximity to downtown Baltimore, and of course, its proximity being directly across the street from Johns Hopkins Bayview. So we undertook this project we started the development process well before opportunity zones came into view. But we were so excited when this project was designated as part of the federal opportunity zone, because it made the conversation with capital investors so much easier. Investors who previously wouldn't have looked or invested in a neighborhood like this, because the demographics weren't up to the typical demographics that someone would typically be looking for when making an investment in a $150 million transaction. So what you're looking at now is this picture here is phase one, which is the retail portion of this project is complete. We were able to bring a grocery store, which hasn't opened yet, Streets Market, to what's a food desert, and a bunch of national retailers who otherwise wouldn't have looked in this neighborhood. You can go to the next slide. If you see, there's more pictures of the retail. And then in addition, phase two will have 220 apartment units, 100,000 feet of medical office. And if the market ever comes back, eventually there's a pad to build a hotel. So we really consider this, it's one of the first, I should mention this, it's one of the first large opportunity zone projects that was green lighted in the state of Maryland. It includes, it includes investment from an institutional investor, which is Prudential Financial. This was their first opportunity zone commitment nationally, which we think is pretty exciting. And that they picked Baltimore and Maryland as a place that they wanted to write their first check for opportunity zones. And we're really excited that this thing's delivered and is doing well so far. So we're pretty excited about that. We can move on to the next slide. That's just a site plan showing phase one, where you have the retail, phase two, where the residential and office are going, and then the hotel on the back of the site. I should mention that phase two has been fully approved by the city of Baltimore and starts construction in spring of 2021. Okay, let's move on. Next slide. So the next slide I want to talk about, this project is called Northwood Commons. This is also located in a federal opportunity zone, but it's immediately adjacent to Morgan State University. You heard some of the other panelists specifically mention this idea of working with working with anchor institutions. This is a really good example of that. So, and it's a story of unbelievable collaboration. So this shopping center sits adjacent to Morgan State University, and was the site of one of the first sit-ins in the country, because obviously you have a historically Black college, and during Jim Crow in Baltimore, the Black students who were attending that college were not permitted to use the diner or the movie theater that were adjacent to the campus. So fast forward now 60 years, the center's fallen into complete disrepair. The neighborhood, which is a relatively strong neighborhood, is seeing some distress, particularly in the retail. And all of a sudden, we have this amazing opportunity to revitalize the neighborhood, starting with the shopping center. And when I say it's an amazing story of collaboration, this required help from the state of Maryland, from the city of Baltimore, from all the neighborhood associations and Morgan State University working together to sort of change a feeling of distrust between private owners and the university and the community, to what now is going to be one of the most exciting real estate development projects in Northeast Baltimore. You can go to the next slide. So you'll see this is a view of the project as planned from the Morgan State's business school. I should just mention to you, you can't see it in the slide, but immediately adjacent to this dilapidated shopping center, which looks like it could also set on fire, Morgan State recently invested $60 million in a brand new state-of-the-art business school. So they have a major investment in sort of trying to see this happen. You can go to the next slide. As you'll see from the slide, what we're basically able to do, most importantly, was attract a grocery store, which is the Lidl supermarket. And then we've got Morgan committed to come onto the property by building a new public safety building for them, as well as their new university bookstore will be on the site. So it's actually a really exciting collaboration. And I'll talk about this a little bit more when I'm done, but that this could not have happened without the Baltimore Development Corporation working hand in hand with us to get Lidl Supermarket here, or the state of Maryland, which made a major financial contribution to this site, and push this thing over the edge with a 7-figure plus contribution to getting this deal done. You can move on to the next slide. So I have several more deals, but I really am going to stop after I talk about this deal. This deal is near and dear to my heart. I should mention one more thing about the previous deal. That building has been demolished, and we received our permits from the Maryland Department of Environment last week. So we will start vertical construction on the Northwood Plaza, site work, I should say, in the next 30 days. So we're pretty excited about that. That'll get underway in the next 30 days. This project is Madison Park North. This one is really near and dear to my heart, and is probably one of the most important projects that MCV will do from an impact perspective, perhaps ever. I guess maybe I'm overstating it, but that's really how we feel about this one. So this project was initially, many years ago, in the late 70s, it was actually a mixed-use project, something that you hear people talk about today, but people had that same concept in the 70s, except it was super poorly executed. It had a grocery store, it had a school, it had apartments, but a lot of things were learned about not figuring out how to mix incomes and other things. And this particular building turned into one of the most dangerous places in the entire city of Baltimore. It was about 220 townhouse style apartments that became a super scary place. And I know because I grew up around the corner from it, and I actually still live around the corner from where this site is today. And in fact, my mother's first office was located in the building that where those apartments were. So every day after school, I would have to go over there, and I would cringe because it was a scary, scary place. In any case, after a lot of wrangling, the city of Baltimore was able to convince the owner that it needed to be torn down. We tore that down with assistance from the state of Maryland through their core program about 2 years ago. And we've been going through the development process to develop what we expect to be a complete game changer for West Baltimore, sort of a new gateway that will include a few hundred apartment units, 30,000 square foot grocery store, some for sale townhomes, which you can't see from this particular rendering, and hopefully some office space. So we're very, very excited about this project, and it represents, it represents taking something that was the bane of the community's life to something that should now be part of the lifeblood of the community. So what do we learn from all this? I sort of think about it as, all these things are a trade-off. And, what is the community getting versus, what the developer's getting. And I think if you look at the 3 projects I just described, each one of them included or will include creating food in a food desert. I mean, it's one of the biggest problems we have here in Baltimore is a lack of access to fresh foods in underserved communities. And I think someone mentioned that as well. Environmental cleanup. The environmental cleanup at the first project I mentioned, Yard 56, just the environmental cleanup was over $15 million before we could even get going on the project. And I think the most important sort of concept is that we are now have the ability to take community problems and convert them into community assets. And that's, I think, one of the most amazing things about opportunity zones in general. But what I want to talk about and what I think people should take away from this is that opportunity zones don't make projects happen. They are, someone mentioned this earlier, they are just tools in the toolbox. To get the deals done, it requires significant collaboration from city and state government. And, in Baltimore and Maryland, we absolutely have that. And you've got, the 2 guys on this phone, Frank Dickson and Ben Seigel from the state and the city respectively, who are extremely focused on helping developers get these projects done and making sure that they know where the resources are. And as I mentioned, between the state and the city, almost $5 million has been committed to these various projects. You need close collaboration with the neighbors and community leaders. As I mentioned in that West Baltimore project, the last one, Madison Park, that's my neighborhood, so it's easy for me to collaborate with those folks. But the projects on the other side of the town are in East Baltimore. And if you know anything about Baltimore, that's like, being in, Venus and Mars, East Baltimore and West Baltimore. But you have to build trust with the community. You have to do what you say you're going to do. And you have to get the community excited about the projects. And we say this all the time. We can build whatever we want, but at the end of the day, if the community doesn't use it, I'm not sure why we wasted our time building it in the first place. And the last thing goes back to the tool in the toolbox conversation. In addition to, opportunity zone capital, each one of these projects has new markets tax credits, brownfields tax credits, all these other layers of financing and other things that you have to pull in to make the projects financially feasible and get the opportunity zone capital to make the deal work. So I just, I think it's very important that as we talk about opportunity zones, we're honest about what it is and what it isn't. It's a great way to get capital that would never have looked at underserved communities to look at those transactions, but it's not a panacea. And we still need all the other tools in the community, in the toolbox to get these projects done. One more comment I want to make. We talked about, being in the 3rd inning. We're absolutely in the 3rd inning, and we got to make sure these things continue so that a lot of the other harder projects that just take a really long time. I mean, these development projects sometimes can have a gestation period of 5 to 7 years before they're actually ready for financing. That we give those projects time to gestate and be ready to accept the capital. We are changing neighborhoods and changing communities. Opportunity zone capital is a key piece of it. And thank you all for listening to me, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, David. Great presentation. Let's move on to our next panelist. We've got 3 more panelists to go and only about 20 more minutes, so we're probably going to go a little bit over, but if we can try to keep our remarks brief going forward, that would help speed things along a little bit. Next panelist is Bill Struever. He is principal and managing partner at Cross Street Partners, and his firm is currently working on redeveloping Baltimore's Penn Station. Really looking forward to hearing more about his project. Bill, do you have a slide deck you want to share? Is he going to take it away?
I thought this was supposed to be over at 3, so I've got another meeting I got to run to. So I'm going to go quick and skip my presentation. So to me, the big unknown is whether we really can drive this OZ incentive to truly challenging investments that address the stated public purpose of OZs in terms of driving economic opportunity into low-income distressed communities and getting the real benefits to those communities like Dave Bramble was talking about. There's a zillion OZs across the country, and a lot of them are in what I would call relatively easy neighborhoods that have strong market demand. Obviously with COVID right now, heaven knows that anything's easy, and particularly in commercial real estate these days. But there are, and that was a lot of the criticism about OZs, is they're so broadly distributed, and targeting to really deliver the goods on high economic community development impact project and businesses, to me, is the big challenge. So we're looking to all our work around the country. We're in 8 different cities. We're looking to team with impact-oriented OZ funds. We're fortunate to close the deal with Blueprint here in Baltimore. They're amazing, very impact-oriented. You're going to hear from Leonard Miller at Verte. We're teaming up with him on a really cool operating business OZ investment, Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group, among others. Our business strategy it goes back to the AURP pitch, the nexus of market-driven jobs, business investment, and university-anchored innovation districts, arguably the most powerful driver of rebuilding the economy of secondary and tertiary market cities. Could give a lot of examples of that. The nexus with the comprehensive neighborhood transformation of distressed low-income communities that are adjacent to these innovation districts. So the goal here is a win-win where you can drive a better, stronger, more prosperous context around these university districts so they have an easier job of attracting great tenants, biotech tenants, as earlier discussed, for those tenants to attract talent if the neighborhood around them is prospering rather than despairing. And at the same time, create a real win in terms of maximizing the housing, education, job, and business opportunities for low-income residents adjacent to these communities, the kind of work that Dave Bramble described. So to me, that is an amazing opportunity for really delivering the goods on OZs. Right now, one of our focuses is working with local, state, and federal agencies and on policies to layer incentives to better target OZ funds to these challenging projects. Again, there's some projects that, absent COVID, would be relatively easy to attract debt and equity regardless of the incentive. The kind of stuff that we're tackling is really, really tough and challenging, and having focused incentives that really drive the goods into these projects, like, again, Dave Bramble described. We have projects that have as many as 35 different sources of funds. So we're hopeful to create new TIF policies, property tax and jobs credit policies, preferences on a range of public programs at the local, state, and federal level that encourage OZ impact investing where you get the biggest bang for the taxpayer buck. A couple examples, you mentioned Penn Station. We're starting with a $140 million investment by Amtrak in Baltimore Penn Station. Unbelievable. Anybody who's watched Penn Station for the last 20 years kind of sit there neglected. Huge investment. We have site control and a 98-year ground lease on 8 building sites that Amtrak owns adjacent to the station. We're expecting about 1.5 million square feet of mixed-use development, about $500 million. We closed at the first stage investment with Blueprint, which is a affiliate of Brown Advisory here in Baltimore. As I mentioned before, very social impact oriented. And we're going to see how much OZ really helps. We're working with a corporate headquarters tenant that is hoping to attract OZ equity to build a new headquarters and office building on one of the Amtrak's properties. In financing an office building in this market, not easy. We'll see whether OZ helps. The mention of biotech, we have a building in the Baltimore, University of Maryland, Baltimore Biopark, Lion Brothers. UMB has their tech incubator and tech transfer program located in their building called GRID. And we're looking for operating business investments. One of our hopes is that the 10-year hold requirement will create a stickiness for investors and incentives for investors rather than doing a venture investment in a promising, fast-growing company coming out of one of Baltimore's incubators, and then the company heads off to Boston or San Francisco or wherever, that the OZ incentive will encourage those investors to keep the business and grow and create jobs here in East Baltimore and West Baltimore. So hope. So we're looking to create sidecar venture funds with some of our venture university partners at innovation districts with this goal in mind. Examples of kind of larger OZ investment, we're one of the partners in Baltimore's East Choice neighborhood. 244 acres, includes part of the Hopkins Medical Campus, biggest employer in the city, stretches down to Harbor East, Harbor Point, arguably some of the most valuable real estate in the state of Maryland. In between are 3 public housing projects, some of the most desperate poverty. So it's $1 billion investment, and we're hoping to attract OZ equity, particularly for our market rate housing that will be part of a 2,500 unit mixed income strategy for the Choice neighborhood. Just north of Hopkins Innovation District, EBDI, we're just finishing up the Center for Neighborhood Innovation at Hone Lithograph. There's another operating business investment opportunity for OZ funds, and I'm hoping that Leonard Miller will talk about it. Outlook is probably one of the fastest growing Black-owned businesses in town. We're really excited to have them in our building. They're building the first full capability animation studio in the mid-Atlantic states, and eager to see whether OZ equity really can help propel that growth. As I said, all our work is in OZs around the country, so we're also looking for OZ equity as an upper tier financial platform for our operating company, Cross Street Partners, and our real estate holding company, Ships. And what the investment there will create a right of first refusal for project level investment. We're putting together a $200 million project level OZ equity opportunity pipeline for potential investors for projects on the small side, like the Packing House in Cambridge, Maryland, devastated what was one of the most prosperous Black communities on the Eastern Shore, Pine Street, never recovered from the A-Trap Brown riots and the closing of the Phillips Packing House. We're redeveloping the Packing House, and we have a great OZ equity operating business opportunity with Blue Oyster Environmental that will have an oyster processing state-of-the-art facility and a nutrient credit trading platform, another kind of great win-win. Electric Works, the first phase of which is closing in December, $270 million transformation of the old GE campus in Fort Wayne, which will have a 100,000 square foot shared office innovation hub with a number of universities, including Indiana University and Purdue, having an active tech transfer presence. And the Dayton Arcade, a $95 million first phase, the anchor tenant there is another shared office innovation hub with the University of Dayton and the Air Force Research Lab as kind of the key driving partners. So we think OZs have the potential to really make a difference with these kind of high impact, challenging projects. I believe the challenge before all of us is to try to create a layering of policies at the local, state, and federal level, along with impact-oriented investors that really want to do what the law says it's supposed to do in terms of creating economic opportunity in communities and for families and community residents that need help the most. So that's my little pitch.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. It's come up a couple times now, the past couple of presentations, the need to layer different economic incentives, different tax credits. Oftentimes, opportunity zones do fall into eligibility with other federal tax credits like new markets and historic tax credits, but certainly there's a lot of local economic incentives, local tax credits that you can go after as well, TIF and otherwise, depending on the locality. But let's move on now to our third panelist in this second half of today's event. I'm going to bring on Leonard Mills. Leonard is the CEO of the Verte OZ Fund, which is a qualified opportunity fund that uses a venture capital approach to invest in innovative operating businesses. And he was mentioned previously in regards to Galen Robotics, one of the investments that his fund has made. Leonard, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Do you have a slide deck that you're going to be sharing from your end, or do you need Hio to run it?
If Hio's there, I'd appreciate if he could run it.
Sure. Go ahead, Hio. Perfect. All right, take it away, Len. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just jump right in here, and I'll go kind of quickly in the interest of time. I'm Leonard Mills with the Verte Opportunity Zone Fund. Next slide, please. We invest in emerging companies. We are a relatively new fund to the OZ space, and we're still open to investors. Next slide, please. This slide was actually covered before by Brian, and he pointed out quite accurately that most of the OZ investments are in the real estate area on the left there, residential, commercial, hospitality. And then on the right, there's the sliver of operating businesses. And then if you think about new startup and emerging companies, it'd be even a smaller sliver. However, what wasn't pointed out before, which I think is an important message here, just because the capital is small, tends to be small in terms of these operating businesses, that does not mean that they are not a powerful source of economic transformation. And I want to speak to that actually on the next slide, please. And if you putting on my economist hat here, if we think about the legislative purpose of the opportunity zones, and this is directly out of the legislation, and was mentioned many times earlier today, it's to promote economic development and job creation in distressed communities. And I break that down into two areas. The first phrase is about economic development and job creation, and the second phrase is about distressed communities. And distressed communities ended up being the OZ census tracts that we now know. But going back to the first phrase there, there's an interesting set of research done by the Boston Consulting Group. This is a long-term graph, goes back to 1954, of the three principal drivers of what's known as US productivity growth. And in turn, that is what affects the wealth of people. This is a per capita kind of measure. It's per man hour in particular. And you see the three principal components of economic growth and how they feed on each other and drive exponential growth. So the first component is long-term capital in the gray section there. That is clearly what part of the opportunity zones is about, is bringing capital into these communities. The next piece is the labor. This is enhanced, this green area, this is enhanced by things related to workforce development, be it education, be it training, and anything that helps the productivity of the individual. And finally, the big blue area there is an area that we focus on in particular, and that's technology innovation. And that is a big driver in terms of the long-term growth. So the types of emerging companies that we invest in tend to have some technological aspect to them. With respect to the opportunity zones, another problem that is well known is 75% of the venture capital goes to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. So the goal of our kind of investment and other investors is to spread out that long-term venture capital. And then I mentioned the other key phrase here is being engaged with these distressed communities. And we think about it in 4 areas. This is borrowed from a group called Collaborative Economics. That includes inclusive society, collaborative governance. There was lots of discussion today about public-private partnerships, nonprofits, all working together for these desired results. With respect to the real estate, these are supposed to be great places to live and work. And finally, the goal is to develop meaningful jobs. And again, going back to that word about the innovative economy. Some people have asked in the chat board, for example, how do we do this? How do we engage with the communities? And Ben earlier on talked about the community engagement is quite important and how they do it there in Baltimore through the BDC and the other community leaders. We use a tool that we're a national fund, so we're very dependent on the local communities to engage on what's important to those communities. Our investments, they're all about jobs and economic development, but the other aspects of the community engagement are very important to engage. And we use a tool developed by the Urban Institute to help measure that community impact. And importantly, that tool requires the community to help score these businesses in terms of their community impact. And that's an important mechanism of how we do this. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'm actually going to skip this slide just in the interest of time and really to focus. I want to spend more time on Baltimore specifically. And on this slide, you'll see the 3 activities, 2 current and 1 potential that we have going on in Baltimore. The 2 current ones are Galen Robotics and the Outlook Company. Both of those were mentioned earlier. The Verte Opportunity Zone and Fund invested in Galen Robotics in late 2019. It was mentioned earlier today. It actually has gotten a fair bit of press. It's been mentioned by the White House as one of the OZ best practices. This company is a medical robotic assistant company. Before I go to that, both of these companies are going to create jobs. They're already hiring people, and they have plans to hire over 100 people within the next year, each of them. They, again, are technology oriented. They also, both of them have a very interesting backstory, and I want to give that backstory as I go through them. Going back to Galen, they're going to be creating jobs, but their technology is around a medical robotic assistant. It helps a surgeon on very, very fine surgery. It's a robotic arm, also has powered by artificial intelligence. And the microsurgery are in areas where a small hand tremor by the surgeon could have devastating consequences. For example, your inner ear, where they're operating in a very small space, your throat, parts of your spinal cord, infants, newborn surgery, where very small tremors can create these problems, all kinds of different problems. So the idea is to have a robotic arm that steadies that. The surgeon is still doing the surgery, but it's being controlled. The robotic arm is being controlled by the surgeon, and again, using artificial intelligence to interpret what the surgeon is trying to do. This company is located in the 1100 Wacomico building in West Baltimore. The backstory on this one, it was the technology came out of the engineering department at Johns Hopkins University. The company was originally founded to license that technology in Silicon Valley, and they decided to move back to Baltimore to be closer to the engineers. So that's a migration that happened from Silicon Valley to Baltimore, to West Baltimore. Turning to the next company, the Outlook Company. This investment we made just a few weeks ago, so it's very new. Bill just mentioned this. This is a full service animation studio, and the animation studio will produce virtual reality, gaming, movies, streaming videos for the streaming services. They have very engaged customers on with Sony and various streaming companies. And the founder of this company is actually very familiar to Baltimore. He played for the Baltimore Ravens, Trevor Price, as an all-pro defensive lineman, played for some other teams as well. But he makes Baltimore his home now, and this is where the studio is. Even when he was in the NFL, he has a very creative bent to him. So he started writing children's books when he was in the NFL, and thereafter he had a music company that he founded as well. And the creativity of that led him to have 2 series on Netflix. They're animated stories called Kulapari. They're on Netflix. And then he wanted to take more ownership of the production of his content and bring it to Baltimore. So again, it was mentioned, this is the only studio like it in this region of the country. There's only 2 minority-owned animation studios in the whole country, and one of them is right here in Baltimore. That's at 21 Biddle Street in East Baltimore. There's just some, in addition to his own content, he's hired a number of local artists and animators that will be helping on this. They've now gotten into preschool programming. They're potentially working with Johns Hopkins on medical animation, and just a wide range of new services coming out of this studio. The last company that I want to highlight here is SAS Electric Vehicles. This company is actually currently in College Park, Maryland, but the ultimate goal of that company is to have locations in multiple opportunity zones across the country. We've been working very closely with Baltimore, and it is a leading candidate for our first franchise of this company. This is another example of taking advantage of technology trends. Electric vehicles are clearly a technology trend. This particular company will be providing the infrastructure around fleet operators as they transition to electric vehicles. That infrastructure will include charging services, repair services for the vehicles that will ease that transition from the municipal and commercial fleet operators as they migrate towards electric vehicles. It's a strong macro trend, just like the other 2 companies are, and that macro trend will be fueling the growth of these companies and the impact on the opportunity zones. Next slide, please. This just gives you more detail. In the interest of time, I won't go through them all. There's other cities that are represented here. Gives the business stage, and importantly, what are the key aspects of the community impact. You'll see words such as workforce development, innovation, domestic manufacturing, and importantly, 4 out of the 6 companies that are on this list, they are reflective of the community engagement that we take part in. 4 out of the 6 companies are minority-founded businesses, and it's not. It's an outcome of our approach to make sure that we are engaged with the community and to make sure that we support the opportunity zone communities and the residents that live there. So this is an important aspect. Next slide, please. And there is my contact information. I guess this will be circulated if anybody wants to get in touch with me and go through any of these companies or anything else. You know where to find me.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Len. Always great hearing from you. Our final panelist today, and I know we're running short on time. We're going over a little bit. I apologize for everybody out there. We got started a little bit late, but we're going to finish with a bang here. Our final panelist today is Brendan Schreiber. He is president of Schreiber Brothers and their current project in Baltimore is North Avenue Workforce Housing. Brendan, how are you doing?
I'm great. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. Do you have a slide deck you're going to be sharing? Can you share that, or do you want to?
Yes, I got it ready. Just give me 1 second to share the screen and we will get started.
All right. That looks good.
So while I'm getting this up, my name is Brendan Schreiber. We've actually got a few members of our team on the call here, but our company is Schreiber Brothers Development. And I'm going to try to gloss over the details of our company because of time. But we are, in general, focused very much on social and economic justice. We specifically focus on West Baltimore because for a lot of the reasons that Dave Bramble mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of questions in the chat about equity and displacement and the fact that most of the folks on this call, at least the ones who are presenting, are white males. And we are specifically trying to repurpose access to resources, and we believe that opportunity zones can very, very easily be misused, and we should be realistic about the fact that this really is just a tax mechanism and an investment tool. So we are trying to repurpose that to the extent possible to bring to achieve really aggressive triple bottom line goals through our projects. And we design all of our projects to be able to attract this kind of funding while also achieving those goals. The project in question here is, we're calling it the North Avenue Live Where You Work project. It's actually a relatively small one. It's only $4.5 million, but it is a highly visible project. It's within a block of many of the images that many of you probably saw during the Freddie Gray uprising back in 2015. It is about a 24,000 square foot project. It's actually technically two buildings because there's a single row house separating the two of them, but for all intents and purposes, it's one project. It will have 5 ground floor commercial units. They're specifically sized for affordability to local businesses. And by local, we really mean minority-owned businesses that are coming from right there in West Baltimore. We will also have 16 apartments above, including the 3 bedrooms for families. The reason that's important is because the commercial tenants on the ground level are going to have the first right of refusal for the apartments above. And the notion of what a family means is not really the traditional American nuclear family notion. So we provided a variety of sizes for of units so that different business owners can either have their families or live alone, whatever is necessary for the units up above. Half of those units will be capped at 80% AMI. We're actually trying to get it down to 60% AMI, which looks like it should be doable. And importantly, we're also making this a zero energy building, which the definition of which is that over the course of a year, your utility bills are about $0. There are some fees associated with having a utility bill period, but generally speaking, you should be able to have zero net energy use over the course of the year. The whole point of this is to be able to reduce transportation costs and utility costs while promoting the affordability of running a business and living in Baltimore. We believe that this model can be used across the board. It does take some creative layering of the capital stack and a lot of collaboration with the city and the state. Several of our partners in those conversations are here on the call as well. And the last thing I want to mention is that there is a lot of activity happening in West Baltimore. I would strongly recommend anyone on this call who is interested in really mission-driven work and investments to look at what's happening in West Baltimore, because even though you can drive down the street and see many vacant houses, that does not really tell the full story. There's a brand new Black Arts District that's running up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, which our project is in the footprint of, and there are very, very, very strong community assets in place in West Baltimore. And the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor is a an area that is ripe for investment, but it is a strong historically Black community, and traditional investors, frankly, will probably not be welcome there. So if you're looking to do work that is celebrating and expanding upon opportunities for people of color in particular, West Baltimore is definitely a place you should be looking at. I've included a couple of a rendering here, just in case anyone wants to see what we're talking about. Again, it's small but highly targeted. And notice that we've got a mural incorporated throughout the facade. This is just a conceptual image. It's not actually what it will necessarily look like. But because we are within the Black Arts District, it's very important to us that we are also providing opportunities for artists. So we're in the middle of a sort of a mural competition that is only just in the process of kicking off, that will provide real direct opportunities for the community to shape what this building looks like. We have no desire to go in and determine, we're not deterministic about our projects where we say this is what it's going to look like. It needs to reflect the wishes of the community and the feel of the community. So we are also providing many opportunities for that to happen. I tried to keep it under 6 minutes, and I think I'm right around there. So this is my contact information. If you'd like to get in touch, we'd be happy to speak about this and other projects in the area soon.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Brendan. Egils, I want to turn it back over to you to get your thoughts, and I don't know if we have time to moderate some Q&A, or if you want to cut everyone loose. I'll leave that up to you.
Well, I think we've gone on a pretty long time. Please send your questions the remaining time on chat, Q&A. We'll get back to you with some answers from the appropriate panelists. Let me just kind of thank everybody. And what I'd like to say is I'm encouraged by the Baltimore story. Very rich content, some amazing things going on in Baltimore. And despite the COVID and the consequent economic disruption, Oz projects, Oz investments are moving ahead. Some cautiously, but some very aggressively. It's quite a story. So let's hope that the election results that we'll be seeing pretty soon do not adversely change this trajectory of investment and project development. We have to remind ourselves that the Oz initiative was a bipartisan one. Senator Scott, Senator Booker got the ball rolling. Trump administration endorsed it as part of the tax reform bill. Indications I have from the Biden campaign is that they're very supportive of the program, even have ideas on maybe enhancing it or complementing it with other kinds of investment. So we need to keep the momentum up, but it also means we need to keep our eye really on the fundamental goal here, which is revitalization, job creation, income enhancement, reducing income inequality. This program will ultimately be judged by its impact on the community, not simply by investor returns. So let's keep our eye on that ball. So thanks to the panelists again, thanks to the sponsors, partners. I want to thank Hio for managing the slide shares. And of course, Jimmy Atkinson, our amazing problem solver, my exciting co-host. We're going to continue this webinar series. This one is being recorded. It'll be available on demand. We'll send you a link when it's ready to show, probably on YouTube. And we'll be moving ahead to other cities and other regions in order to highlight what they're doing with the Opportunity Zone incentive, and particularly highlight their innovative projects. So I'm ready to bring this to a close. I want to thank everybody for their participation, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Egils.